Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trendcrusher podcast. I'm Peter K, aka Trendcrusher. This week on the podcast, I've got John Fraser, who's one half of Hand of Kalliach. They're all the way from Scotland, and this weekend they have their second album, Corryvreckan, which is out via Prosthetic Records. I've been quite fascinated with the band since they explore themes of Celtic mythology, and we dive into that and a lot more in my chat with John. So here it is. Hi, John. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Peter, thanks very much for having me on. Great to meet you.
I'm really glad that we're doing this. And I have to give and start out this episode with a huge shout out to my friend Joel, who writes for the website The Metal Wanderlust. I was contributing and I did for a long time to the website, and he actually was one of the people who told me about the band. So I'm glad to finally speak to you and talk about all things Hand of Kalliach.
Awesome. Yeah, no, Joel's been a fantastic supporter. Him and Serena did a fantastic big write-up for us for last album, Samhain, which was really, really in depth, and we really enjoyed doing it with them. So yeah, it's great stuff. Glad you found him that way.
Yeah, so I'm definitely going to leave a link to that because I think that's easily till date the most in-depth coverage I've seen of that album, and you'll kind of went
Yeah,
through the entire thing. So I'm gonna leave that in the show notes. But
awesome.
fast forward to 3 years later, we're talking about and we're speaking in the week of the release of your sophomore album, which is Corryvreckan. I hope I said that correctly, first of all. But
Yeah,
it's
Corryvreckan. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
Corryvreckan's out via Prosthetic Records. How does it feel like we're in the week of album release house? Is there butterflies? Are you just like, you know what,
Yeah.
I'm finally, it's done? What's the feeling?
Yeah, probably a bit of both, to be honest. It's been something we've been working on for a fair while, and we had a little bit of a run up with Prosthetic as well, just while they were getting things sorted out from their end, and we had to slot within their sort of release cycle as well. So, in one sense, as you say, it's kind of relief to finally be getting the album out there. And the other side of things, it's really exciting, and you can't help but have those pre-release butterflies, as you say. Just looking at the coverage that's already rolling in, which thankfully has been really positive so far. And yeah, just really excited for release day on Friday.
Now, one of the things I definitely wanted to talk to you about was just the entire story behind the album, right? I mean, for some context, especially, it was very interesting for me to do research where, uh, India, you have this entire thing of mythology and storytelling. But when I was reading about the Scottish witch god of winter, which is what you'll have named yourselves after, Kalliach, uh,
Absolutely, yeah,
the link between, and I'm guessing that's where the link between the album name and the band name is, where there's a story that
absolutely.
she lives at the bottom of an enormous whirlpool, which is called Corryvreckan, and it's near the Isles of Islay, which is on the west of Scotland. Uh,
Yeah,
you have ties to that part of the world, right? I mean, that's part of the country.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So my mum's family's all from Islay, which is that island on the west coast of Scotland. And the Corryvreckan whirlpool is just a bit north of there, off the Isle of Jura. It sits between Jura and Scarborough, which is the island next to that as well. So all very much in the same sort of vicinity. In fact, Sophie and I actually went up to the Corryvreckan just this summer past last year and visited it, which was fantastic to actually see in all its glory. It was pretty relaxed at the time, but in the winter and at high tides, it can get absolutely very, very violent, and very very scary. You wouldn't want to be in a boat at that sort of time for sure. But yeah, as you say, the sort of linkage with the old Kalliach, which god of winter, is very much where we got the band name from, and a lot of the sort of inspiration behind kind of the sound, I guess, as much as some of the writing and some of the mythology that kind of goes through the lyrics, and some of the seascapes and landscapes and themes that run through it. But she's kind of very variously depicted in the mythology as being this sort of very vengeful, dangerous deity that hunts humans and brings in winter and causes death and destruction and mayhem and all that good standard metal stuff. But on the other hand, she's also portrayed as this very not nurturing, positive sort of creator deity that's quite pro nature and quite sort of gentle in some ways. And I guess that sort of duality is very much something that we try to bring across with our music, with Soph's very sort of clean, ethereal, light sort of vocals, contrasted against the more sort of standard mellow death stuff that I'm probably bringing from a vocal perspective, and our sort of instrumentation as well.
So I'm very curious, considering what all you just told me, what came first for Coryrec? Was the concept already there because it's a kind of extension of the previous album, or did the music come? So how do you guys kind of
Yeah.
plan that out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was probably the former. So I think because we'd done Samhain, and I think we'd really liked the thematic sort of bucketing of that, and how we'd pulled a lot of the tracks together to be around that sort of start of winter. When we were thinking about what the sort of focal point would be for the next album, we were kind of drawn to the whirlpool as a concept, if you like. And I think it just matched very much with the way our sound was developing, which was this really sort of really thick, really heavy, sort of almost churning sort of atmosphere that we kind of create. Much heavier than perhaps even some of the earlier stuff that we'd done as well. And I just love the concept in the mythology that there's this, tremendous witch god of winter lurking beneath this tremendous whirlpool, and arising at the start of Samhain to usher in winter, and cast the land with her sort of cloak that's all that's whitened by washing in the whirlpool, and then it lands as snow across the lands. Like, there's a lot of really beautiful imagery and themes that come with all that. And again, just being able to really maximize the duality of a whirlpool that sometimes is calm as glass during the day, or during low tides, but then at high tides it can be really quite quite a maelstrom. Was really fun to kind of build the concepts around. So the first track on the album is called Three Seas, and that's actually taken from some of the earliest descriptions of the Corryvreckan whirlpool, which is from an old Irish text. And it basically talks around these three seas that are feeding into this horrendous cauldron, which was the precursor name for Corryvreckan. And these three seas combining together create this roaring mouth, as it is described in Cormac's glossary. And that was really where we took things from there, and really wanted to really bring this concept of this roaring cauldron to life all the way through, and woven in with some of the tales of the Kalliach and some of the other aspects of Scottish mythology as well.
Wow, that's so interesting, and especially uh, one thing I like, and I'm grateful, at least for those of us who got an advance copy, is you sent like an English translation. But
Yeah.
it's also cool because, and I'm gonna draw parallels, and forgive me for doing this, but when I heard the first single, Fell Rains, I was kind of reminded of a more epic Alcest, if
Oh,
that
awesome.
makes
Yeah.
sense. And I think it's
Yeah,
primarily
I'll
to do
take that for
with
sure.
the clean vocals, at least the latter part of Alcest. But to be honest, I don't think I want to know what they're singing about. I'd just rather just like hum and sing along in there, and that would have been a
Awesome.
very similar thing for you all. But was that something that was very clear from the outset for you, as something that you and Sophie decided that when we're doing this music, it's only going to be in Gaelic? Or
I think no, I think we do quite a mix, to be fair. I mean, I've been learning Gaelic for a few years now, just as a hobby more than anything else. It's not particularly commonly spoke, even in Scotland, to be honest. It's really confined to some pockets of the West Coast and a few areas on the mainland. And I'd say, as much as some of my vocals are pretty inaudible sometimes, I would say the majority of what I'm singing is usually still in English, but there's just some sections. But the more I've kind of dipped into it, and the more I've been learning, the more I've been able to do a bit more on the Gaelic side of things. So, Dioghaltas, which is the third track on Corryvreckan, was the first attempt I did at having an entire song, at least from my side, of doing it on the Gaelic side of things. I think it's got some fantastic intonation that really lends itself to metal really very well. And that was definitely something we found, even just doing the initial EP that we started off with, the sort of homemade one that kind of kicked us all off, really. There was a few Gaelic passages on there that I really enjoyed doing, just because it sounded so aggressive when you throw it in with death metal vocal styles. But it balances off really well with I mean, Soph's vocals are fantastic. I've always thought she was a brilliant singer even before we started doing the band stuff together. And being able to kind of balance that off with some of the rougher vocals that I've been doing has been really great to get it to come together and work and resonate with people, I guess.
Yeah, I think that balance is very delicate, and I think neither kind of overpowers each other. But for all those who are wondering, hey, what are they talking about? I don't understand exactly this. Why don't we give them a taste from the album? So,
Awesome.
what song would you recommend we play and why?
Well, I've just given a bit of an intro to Dioghaltas, I guess. That's probably a good one to kick off with. Really, really heavy from the outset was kind of where we wanted to go with it. The translation of Dioghaltas is like vengeance or revenge in Gaelic. And it's a real balanced off song between the rage of my sort of protagonist vocals versus Soph's sort of regretful, mournful sort of singing about the dangers or the repercussions for following and focusing too hard on the pit that you get into when you're seeking that revenge or vengeance, and how it's ultimately quite a fruitless pursuit sometimes. So yeah, that's his Dioghaltas.
Awesome. Here it is. And that was Joltis, and I'm talking to John. So I was also very curious about, and just kind of take me through the journey of the album. I mean, we started off our conversation talking about the response to your previous album, Samain. At which point did you all realize that this album is going to be coming out? Corryrec is going to be releasing on Prosthetic, and if you could just share as much as possible about how the deal came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was actually, if I'm honest, it was actually a few months ago that we actually got the deal in with Prosthetic. We just had to align with their sort of release cycle and schedule, which was fine with us because we wanted to do a few more bits and pieces, and it allowed us to do things like the music video and get a bit more prep set up, because they were able to fund and support us a lot more than we would have been able to do just by ourselves as we'd done previously. But in terms of how the deal came about, we used to be on Trepanation Recordings, which is run by Dan Dolby from the band Mastiff, actually. So he has been running Trepanation for quite a while, which is a sort of UK-based underground distro and label. And he's been really, really kind, really supportive with us. He put out our first EP as well, picking us up from the obscurity of the underground, and then also did our release for our first full length Samhain, as you mentioned. We've kind of chatted it through with him, so I've been emailing him and said, "Oh, hey, we're pretty much ready with the production side of number two, the Corryvreckan album. Would you be keen to put it out?" And he said, "Look, yeah, I'd love to, guys, but you should really look at pitching this somewhere higher." And he's always been such a fantastic guy and fantastic supporter that he was really pushing us to give it a shot and see if a bigger label would want to take us on. So we made a pretty short list of labels we would really love to work with that we thought, in a dream scenario, might want to take us and take the project on. And Prosthetic was right at the top of the list. We've always been really big fans of some of the stuff they've put out, from some of their older alumni even to some of the newer stuff. Even just last year, I think I picked up albums from For Token, Dawn of Ouroboros, and the Astroborn one as well, were three fantastic records that came out on Prosthetic. So I've always been a fanboy of it, and same with Soph as well. And so we emailed them, and I think we emailed about two other labels at the same time over the course of that day. But we were just progressing with emailing a fourth one when we got an email back from Prosthetic like 2 hours after emailing them, and it was Steve over there, who looks after a lot of the A&R side of things, had actually picked up one of the first 50 CDs of our sort of demo EP from Trepanation right when we got started, and unbeknownst to us, had been a fan pretty much from like day one, which was just amazing. And he said all this in the email. We were really, really stunned and blown away that we'd had such a significant backer effectively, quietly sitting in the eaves from day one. And he said, "Look, Prosthetic, I'll circle it around. We do everything by sort of committee, so we need to all agree that it's an album and a project and a vibe that we're all into. But I really like it. Let me circle back and see what they say." And I think it was all done and dusted within like 2 weeks, from that initial email to contract being signed. And then we were just stunned, head spinning, because getting the chance to sign with a big substantial label with a long history and a really high pedigree like Prosthetic was just it was just a dream, particularly considering how relatively short a period of time we'd been going for, and the fact that we hadn't been able to play out live yet as well, which we thought would be a real barrier to getting substantial label backing. Yeah, it was fantastic.
So, okay, I was going to ask another question, but let me reframe this question. Was there any pressure going into Corryvreckan? I mean, keeping in context that you'll have been around now for 4 years, Hand of Kalliach, did the response to Samain actually have an impact on this, or there was some kind of thing where you said, you know what, let's just segregate it or segment it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think we definitely did feel a lot more pressure this time around, even though we hadn't known that we were going to be signing with Prosthetic. When we were just writing and recording and producing the Corryvreckan album, we we knew that we'd had a really kind and positive reception for Samhain. But I guess the difference was, with when we were writing Samhain, we'd never really tried a full length like a cohesive 10-track front to back thematic album that made sense together. Like the EP that we'd started off with was kind of a selection of pretty wide genres, all sort of linked together by doing some more extreme Scottish metal, but we were kind of exploring a little different styles, whereas with Samhain it was the first full effort. But as a result, we didn't really have massive expectations for ourselves or otherwise. Whereas this time around, I think we took a lot more time to really make sure we got the tracks right, that it did all fit together and was, of a standard or higher, hopefully, than what we'd done for Samhain. So we definitely did have a bit more pressure there. And certainly once we got the signing with Prosthetic and got the deal in place there, the pressure amped up, a little bit more as well, because we obviously really want to make sure that we're not letting them down as well. But thankfully we've been very lucky with some of the positive comments and reviews that we've seen come through so far. So fingers crossed, the fans like it. But we'll see.
Since you said that, right, I also am very keen to know. I mean, you've hit quite a few milestones if you look back, right? Let's start off with the simple one. You're talking to someone who's heard you halfway around the world, right?
Yeah,
And you're
exactly.
a band that has never played live before. So think about that as one thing. But then also, you're assigned to a label across the sea. You have your second album coming out. Was there, if you look back when you started out, were there any goals or ambitions that you had? And do you have now any?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. I think when we started out, we didn't have any real goals at all. We were kind of, I'd played in bands a lot when I was younger, but then had a big hiatus in sort of my mid late 20s and early 30s, where I really didn't do much on the musical writing side of things or playing at all, other than just hanging out and playing guitar by myself or playing drums or whatever. And so when we started off, it was me and Sophie just at home in lockdown, looking for something to keep us occupied. And something we chatted about for a while was doing a different approach to folk metal, and rather than go down the more traditional route of having more of those folk influences and folk instruments included in the mix, quite prominently, try and bring some of those flavors and themes and rhythms and adapt them for the guitars instead. So you still have that edge and that sort of aggression while still having the folky sort of influences. But I mean, at the time, it was basically just that we were just experimenting with the sound. And one thing we've really enjoyed about the project is being able to be quite true to the original vision. I think certainly when I used to play in other bands, you would always have to compromise a lot, which is no bad thing, of course, because you end up with a much more interesting sort of collaborative sort of product at the end of it. But you do have to compromise. So if you're bringing something that you think, I really want to do, this style of music, or I want to bring this type of energy to a track, then you've got to take into account, or it's all added to by what everyone else is bringing. So the end song can sound quite different to maybe what you initially intended it to sound like, which again can be no bad thing, but it's just a different way of doing it. Whereas with this one, because it's just the two of us, we got to stick really closely to that original vision. And again, because we're married, like, it's really easy to have those sort of pointed debates and discussions as to, well, that bit's rubbish, that track is not working, we need to change this. And it's like, yeah, okay, fine. Because you don't have to worry about the politics and keeping people like happy and on board.
So I mean, the thing is, and I don't know why I didn't realize that you all were married, but, and my wife and I, and the only reason I'm asking you this is because my wife and I keep discussing that we would be horrible to work with each other. Yeah, but there's also that, objectivity, so to say, that sometimes gets blurred when, I mean, I could even expand it. It could be even if it's your sibling, or let alone someone you're married to, right? Was there rules that you all had in that?
I guess it just depends on the types of relationships you've got, right? Because I think I can trust Soph to give me a very frank and honest answer. If something's not up to scratch, then then we can have that discussion, and we can be a lot more. I would be a lot more comfortable giving Soph, and I think Soph would say the same of me, giving her feedback a bit more plainly than perhaps if it was like a bandmate or something like that who'd brought along, a riff that they were really precious about, but it wasn't really fitting with the song. I think that's always a more difficult conversation to balance than sometimes if we're sitting around the breakfast table and I'm strumming away on the guitar, and so it's like, um, could you maybe do that later? Then it's I can take that without any pride being hurt, and that's absolutely fine. And so actually, it meant that particularly when we were starting out, we were a lot faster at being able to revise and chop and change and ditch tracks that weren't working or rework ones that needed reworking, because we're just there all the time, and we've got little kids as well, so they kind of keep us firmly anchored in the house. But it means we've got that much more time to just sort of whittle away on the guitars, as I say, in the evenings and even during the daytimes and things like that, and just see what works and what doesn't. So you can work on something in the morning, and then you can have a chat about it, or say that maybe that bit doesn't work, and you can come back and do a revised version by like lunchtime, or do it in the evening or whatever, and it can be a quite a lot faster creative process as a result, even though it can be, as you allude to, it can be a bit more fractious at some points, but it does fast track things to the final form you're looking for.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I wanted to go back on something that you mentioned right before I got into that question. Was you talked about being in bands in your 20s and taking a bit of a hiatus from music. Do you feel that that's why your approach is so different in Hand of Kalliach? That, you've got that experience, so that, you don't want to be selling out Wembley or the O2 and things like that, because that's the kind of reason when you look at it, when you're a teenager, you want to start a band, right? Or you want to tour the US, or there's that romanticism of being in a band. I mean, now that you're in your 30s, that gets stripped away, right? So you're very grounded in a certain way. So that's where your approach towards music has changed, you would say?
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty fair to say. I think yeah, when you're doing it when you're younger, you're excited, and you're interested in all the different ways that the band can evolve and the band as a concept can evolve. And you're on the ride along with everyone else who's in the band as well. So everything's kind of new, particularly when you're really just playing in your first sort of bands. So any level of progress and recognition is very exciting, and you can start to pursue it for the sake of just that, as you say. Regardless of what music we make. If you're wanting just to play some big shows, then you start looking towards, well, what's popular, and what's gonna get me the attention, because if they're doing it, then people are clearly liking what that band is doing, so maybe we should do something more like that. Whereas I think, as you say, if you take some time and take a step back, then it can just make you go, well, what do I want to do? What am I getting at the music? What do I want to get at the music? And again, just given that it was just something we'd wanted to do, and a type of weird and slightly unusual music that maybe we'd wanted to make, maybe gave us a very different drive for what we were doing, and gave us a very different result as a consequence, I suppose. So, yeah, I think perspectives, as you say, definitely shift as you get older, and different things come into play, and different realities emerge.
Okay. And I know this may be like, considering everything I just said, uh, maybe the opposite, but now that you've kind of seen this entire journey of the last 4 years, do you now have, say, certain goals and ambitions, no matter how big or small they may be, and whatever you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I mean, I think we've both been blown away by the response, because I think when you're doing something that's weird and niche, you never really expect it to gather much traction at all. And we have been really humbled and blown away by both the fan response, the reviewer responses, and obviously getting picked up by the label as well has been just amazing. We'd love to keep it going. We're really keen to play live, so we are rehearsing at the moment and trying to get up to speed on that front. So we definitely want to start playing out and playing some shows where we can fit it in with, parental responsibilities and real world realities. But yeah, love to play some more. We'd love to release some more albums. We're already sitting on a few bits and pieces that didn't make the cut for Corryvreckan, but are still good tracks that we'd like to sort of rework and rebuild in again, and see where it takes us, really. But I think the biggest reward from all of this is just hearing the feedback that people are liking your jams as much as anything else, especially when, as I say, it's something a bit weirder.
So now I have to ask, because my question was going to be about uh, going to play live. So I'll hold the question on that until you'll actually go live, and let's keep some of the suspense, right? I don't want to dig too
Cool.
much on that. But you mentioned that you have young kids. Are they old enough to kind of understand that, hey, our parents play in a band? Do they like see music around, or are they that little that they just like, what's this weird guy holding in his hand?
There's definitely a bit of both. So the youngest one's only a couple of years old, and then the older one is, yeah, she's coming up to 8 now. So she definitely gets it a bit more. But yeah, I mean they dig it. They have to suffer through a lot of my playlists and things when I'm making dinner sometimes. And they've got their own tastes for sure. And the middle one's into all sorts of interesting sort of pop and rap bits and pieces. But yeah, the oldest one's always drawing pictures of storms and cloaked sea witches and stuff like that. So they're absolutely
Wow.
fantastic. I'm,
Metal.
determined to get what. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. She's a proper little goth. She's fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to using one of her pictures as a album art one day or something like that as a
Nice.
limited run.
Yeah, that'll be fun, I'm sure. But
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
okay, just to wrap up, I mean, and again, as much as you can share at this moment, what can those who've listened so far to the episode expect from Hand of Kalliach this year?
So well, live shows is the number one priority for this year. So once we get the record out, and once we get up to standard, get everything linked in together with the atmospherics, I think that's one of the real challenges that we've got on the playing live side, is that, and something we've been able to get away with being a studio-based band for up to now, is that we can get away with choirs and string sections and atmospherics and things all being pumped through. But it's a much more tricky beast to get all that working in concert with a live playthrough as well. So I think it's going to take us a couple of months just to get up to standard on that. But that is the number one goal for the band this year for sure.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. And yeah, I'm guessing those in the UK, Scotland, in particular would be, I'm pretty jealous of them because they'd probably get first dibs on a show from you guys. But yeah, all the best to you, and looking forward to hearing more updates from Hand of Kalliach this year.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Peter, and thanks very much for all the support. Been a pleasure.
And that was Hand of Kalliach. Do check out their album Corryvreckan, which is out now via Prosthetic Records. As always, check the links in the show notes. And while you're doing that, why don't you follow me on social media? I'm on Instagram and on Twitter. Just search for Trendcrusher, or follow me on the podcast platform that you're listening to this episode on. Lot more metal coming up in the next couple of weeks, so definitely stay tuned. I'll see you all very soon. Cheers.